She walked in quietly, barely noticed, wearing a borrowed GI and old sneakers. By the time she stepped on the mat, the smirks had already started. They thought she didn't belong there. 10 seconds later, the room fell silent. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing. We share them with respect. The door to the dojo opened with a soft chime. Afternoon sun spilled in, casting a long shadow that stretched across the clean wooden floor. She stepped inside slowly, a canvas gym bag slung over her shoulder. Her hair was tied back in a plain knot. She wore a loose gray sweatshirt, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. Heads turned for a moment, then quickly turned back. Another beginner, nothing special. The instructor glanced up from his clipboard and nodded toward the check-in table. "First class?" he asked without looking her in the eyes. She nodded and quietly filled out the form. The room hummed with the sound of warm-ups, slaps of feet on mats, the low buzz of conversation. Nobody offered a greeting, nobody asked her name. She handed the clipboard back. The instructor passed her a rental GI, still creased from storage. Locker rooms are to the right. "We're doing drills today. You can jump in after warm-ups." In the changing area, she moved quickly, folding her sweatshirt and jeans neatly into her bag. The GI was slightly too large, the fabric stiff at the sleeves. She tied her white belt with calm precision, not too tight, not too loose. Her face in the mirror showed no sign of emotion, just readiness. Back on the floor, the class had already begun. The room was filled with a mix of students, young adults, teens, a few kids in the corner with colored belts, and a cluster of black belts who talked and stretched with the easy confidence of people who had nothing left to prove. She stepped softly to the side and watched. The instructor motioned her to join the back row. Her form was crisp and controlled as she followed the group through basic movements. When others snapped their punches for show, hers moved clean and direct without waste. A pair of teenage black belts near the front noticed her. One nudged the other and whispered, their eyes scanning her movements. "Looks like someone watched a few YouTube videos and thought they could join a real class," one said, snickering. The other chuckled, but didn't take his eyes off her. There was something odd about the way she moved. Nothing flashy, but something that didn't fit with the beginner label. The instructor called for a water break. She stepped aside, took a quiet sip from her bottle, and stood against the wall alone. She didn't seem bothered, she didn't speak. The black belts continued to chat among themselves. They stretched with exaggerated movements, trading stories of tournaments and sparring matches. One of them, tall and wiry with sharp eyes, threw a flurry of punches into the air, fast and loud. "Bet she doesn't even know what a proper stance is," he muttered. Another joined in, mimicking a clumsy kick and laughing. She didn't react. She was watching the instructor as he demonstrated a new technique. Class resumed with basic sparring drills. Students were paired off and the sound of bare feet shifting on mats filled the room. She was again motioned to the side, waiting while everyone else found partners. A moment later, a younger student approached her hesitantly. He was probably around 13, his yellow belt loose at the waist. She bowed slightly and they began the drill. She moved with careful control, always making sure her partner could keep up, always respectful. The instructor walked by and paused. He watched her quietly for a few seconds, then gave a single nod and continued. As the drills progressed, the pace picked up. The black belts were now sparring at half speed, trying to outdo one another. Their strikes were louder, their blocks more dramatic. Occasionally, a voice would rise in laughter as someone landed a clean hit. The instructor clapped his hands, reset. Time for freestyle sparring rotations. One-on-one light contact. Switch partners every 2 minutes. She stepped back uncertain. The other students quickly reformed into pairs. A few glanced in her direction, smirking. The instructor scanned the room, his eyes settled on her. "You," he said, gesturing. "Let's get you a real feel for sparring." He turned to the tall black belt, who had been showing off earlier. "Oliver, go easy." Oliver grinned. "Always do, sir." There was a chuckle from the black belts. Someone whispered, "Poor lady's about to rethink that free trial." She walked onto the mat with quiet steps. Oliver bowed lazily. She bowed in return, her eyes steady. Her stance was simple, almost neutral. The room buzzed with low anticipation. The instructor stepped back. Hajime. Oliver moved in quickly, but not recklessly. His hands were up, chin tucked. His first jab was fast, a probing shot to test her reaction. She didn't move. The second strike came a bit harder. She shifted her weight slightly, just enough to avoid it. Her expression didn't change. Oliver smiled, trying to provoke her. He feinted a kick, then moved in for a quick strike. The moment his foot left the ground, she stepped in. One hand deflected his arm, the other grabbed his wrist. With a twist of her hips and a single smooth motion, she dropped low and swept his leg out from under him. His back hit the mat with a heavy thud. The air left his lungs in a grunt. The room froze. She stepped back and resumed her stance. Calm, controlled. Oliver blinked, dazed, trying to process what had happened. The other students stared. The instructor said nothing. The moment ended and the class seemed to restart with a jolt. A few people muttered. One black belt looked around and whispered, "What did she just do?" Another shook his head. That wasn't beginner level. She didn't explain. She bowed to Oliver, who sat up slowly, nodding in stunned silence. He rubbed his back and glanced at the instructor, who still hadn't said a word. The rotation continued. She was paired next with a middle-aged man in a green belt. He bowed respectfully, clearly nervous now. Their match was uneventful. She matched his pace, never pressing, never showing off. But the dojo had changed. Whispers moved through the group. Eyes followed her. A few younger students exchanged glances and looked her up online. One of them tilted their phone to show another. Their eyes went wide. The instructor ended the rotation and called everyone in. Good work. That's it for today. Line up. She stepped into line at the far end. The instructor walked slowly across the front. He stopped in front of her, his voice louder than before. Sometimes we think we know who someone is. We guess based on how they look, what they wear, how they carry themselves. But assumptions can be wrong. He paused, letting the words settle. He looked at her and gave a small, respectful nod. Thank you for joining us. She bowed slightly, still no words. The class was dismissed. Students gathered their bags and chatted in hushed tones. Some stole glances at her. Others avoided her gaze entirely. She moved to the corner, untied her belt, and folded her gi neatly into her bag. As she stepped toward the door, a small voice stopped her. "Excuse me," said the boy with the yellow belt. He looked up at her with wide eyes. "Can you teach me that move someday?" She looked down, then offered the faintest smile. "If you practice hard, you'll learn it." He nodded quickly, then stepped aside. She pushed the door open and walked out into the fading light. The door closed behind her with the same soft chime. The dojo was quiet. The room hadn't been the same since she arrived. It wouldn't be the same again. The next class arrived 2 days later, and the quiet woman returned through the same front door, dressed the same way, with the same calm demeanor. She walked in with the ease of someone who didn't need to prove anything. The dojo, however, was no longer indifferent. Heads turned the moment she entered. Conversations paused briefly before resuming in a more hushed, cautious tone. She signed in without a word and accepted the same rental GI from the shelf. The instructor gave her a quick glance, then looked back down at his notes. The clipboard shook slightly in his hand. Inside the locker room, she changed with quiet efficiency. A couple of women near the benches whispered behind their towels, pretending not to look at her. One of them finally turned and asked, "Hey, what belt were you before you started here?" She looked up, expression neutral. "White?" The woman blinked. "White? Really?" But that throw the other day. She didn't answer. Instead, she tied her belt and turned toward the mirror, adjusting her collar. The conversation died in the air. Back in the main room, warm-ups had already started. She joined the group and fell into rhythm, mirroring each movement with quiet precision. Every stretch, every motion was measured and deliberate. While others focused on flexibility or flair, she moved with economy. It wasn't flashy. It was something deeper. Some of the black belts noticed and tried to mimic the subtle timing of her movements. They fell short without understanding why. Oliver, the black belt she had taken down earlier, stood off to the side today, his ankle lightly taped. He wasn't laughing this time. He watched her with a narrowed gaze and folded arms. Some part of him still didn't understand how he had ended up on the floor. The instructor split the class into groups again. This time, she was not automatically sent to the beginners. She found herself in a small circle of higher belts, some wearing black, others brown. There was no laughter from this group, only tension. The kind of tension that came when people felt uncertain about their place in a room. She bowed into her group, as did the others. The drill was simple, a series of flowing block and strike sequences, working with a partner in sync. The first to volunteer stepped in front of her. He was in his late 22nd, muscular, confident, and trying to mask his nerves with a grin. They began slowly. He moved through the motions with practiced rhythm, but her reactions were always just a fraction faster, a little more exact. She never overpowered. She met his strength with technique. Halfway through the set, he lost the beat and stumbled. "Sorry," he muttered. She simply nodded. "Breathe." He blinked, adjusted his footing, and they started again. The instructor roamed the room, watching quietly. He spent more time near her group than anywhere else. From the corner, Oliver kept watching, his eyes locked on her every move. By the time they rotated partners, the dynamic had shifted. People were no longer performing for attention. They were trying to keep up. Each new partner adjusted their approach, focused more carefully, and said less. Later in the session, the instructor called for everyone to circle up. "Today," he said, "we're going to run a controlled sparring ladder. 1-minute bouts, tap out, or clean point. Strike ends the round. We'll rotate quickly." A murmur passed through the room. This was a drill usually reserved for the more advanced classes. The instructor looked around, then raised a hand and gestured toward her. "Join the rotation?" Her eyes met his. She nodded and stepped forward. Some of the younger students shifted uncomfortably. One of the teenage black belts whispered, "This is going to get awkward." The matches began. Each fighter stood in the center and faced a fresh opponent each round. Some bouts were swift, some ended with a clever strike, some with a respectful tap. When it was her turn to step into the ring, the room grew quieter. Her opponent was a brown belt, quick on his feet with solid form. He bowed deeply before they began. They circled once. He threw a high kick that she dodged with a slight lean. He followed up with a low sweep. She stepped out of range and turned her hip, deflecting the angle with the side of her leg. She didn't attack. He tried again. This time, she caught his wrist mid-strike, redirected his momentum, and tapped his shoulder with her open hand. Point. They reset. The round ended without another exchange. The next fighter stepped in, a heavier set black belt with years of experience. He wasn't taking chances. He opened with a flurry of measured jabs, testing her reflexes. She deflected each one. No wasted movement, no tension in her shoulders. He changed angles. She pivoted. He tried to trap her against the edge of the ring. She slipped through the gap and ended up behind him before he could react. A light tap to his back. Point. By now, the entire dojo was watching. The instructor crossed his arms and said nothing. More rounds passed. She never struck first. She never missed an opening. Each movement was calm and direct. Her expression never changed. There were no cheers, no celebration, just quiet nods and stunned silence. After her final round, she bowed and stepped out of the circle. She didn't speak. She returned to her place in the line and waited for the rest of the matches to finish. The atmosphere had shifted. What was once mockery was now confusion, unease, curiosity. A group of students huddled near the water cooler, whispering. "She's not new," one said. "Did you see that grip?" "That's military-style joint control," said another. "She used a pivot I've only ever seen in national competitions. That's not beginner level." A younger student pulled out their phone and started typing. One of the others leaned in. "What are you doing?" Searching her face. "There's apps that can do that now." They watched the screen load. After a moment, the boy's eyes widened. "No way," he said quietly. "What? She's on here. Isabel Moreau. That's her. She's older now, but look at the eyes." Same person. The other stared at the screen. International openweight champion twice. She was on the cover of Tactical Arts Quarterly. She trained joint force units, not just regular military like special teams. Across the dojo, Oliver stood with his arms crossed, listening. The instructor finally stepped forward. All right, good work today. Let's cool down and line up for final ball. The students shuffled back into line. This time, she was positioned in the center, not the edge. The instructor looked at them all, his expression unreadable. Martial arts is about more than form and strength. It is about humility. It's about knowing that someone's rank, appearance, or silence is never the full story. He paused. Today, I believe we were reminded of that. He turned to her. She met his gaze evenly. We welcome all students here, but some of them teach us whether they intend to or not. He bowed slightly. She returned the gesture. Class was dismissed. Students collected their things in a quieter mood. There were no jokes, no laughter, just glances and murmurs. Near the shoe rack, one of the young black belts hesitated, then approached her. "Excuse me," he said. Were you really an instructor before?" She looked at him for a moment, then with a quiet voice answered, "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I thought so. I've been studying a video from a tournament years ago. There was a fighter with a drop pivot I've never been able to copy. That was you, wasn't it?" She said nothing, but her faint smile was answer enough. Behind him, more students watched. One girl approached. "I didn't know someone could move like that without showing off." She turned slightly and answered, "Control is not for show. It's for when it matters." They nodded, absorbing her words like a lesson. The instructor stood by the office door, hands folded, watching. He had been in this dojo for over a decade, and nothing in that time had challenged the culture here the way she had in 2 short classes. She gathered her bag and stepped out into the hall. As she opened the door to leave, someone from the far end called out, "Miss Moreau, are you teaching anywhere right now?" She paused. "Number A." Moment of silence followed. Then someone asked, "Would you?" She turned slightly, nodded once, then walked out into the evening light. The door shut gently behind her. The room stayed quiet for a long time. The name was out now, the truth unfolding quietly among them. She had spoken little, explained even less, and yet nothing had gone unnoticed. Inside, the instructor looked at the roster sheet, her name printed neatly in pen. He placed it back on the desk, then turned toward the mats again. Whatever they had expected from her, they had been wrong. She had changed the room without ever raising her voice. Her presence lingered long after she was gone, in the silence, in the stillness, in the way the others moved just a little differently than before. The dojo was quiet before class, more than usual. A few students arrived early, but they spoke in hushed tones. There was none of the usual joking, no loud stretches or thrown punches meant to impress. The mat was empty, waiting. Every person who walked in glanced at the door within seconds as though they were expecting something. Someone Isabel entered like she always did, calm, composed, nothing rushed or dramatic. She placed her bag by the bench, changed in the locker room, and stepped onto the mat with quiet precision. By the time she returned, the energy in the room had shifted. People straightened their stances, conversation stopped. The instructor came out of his office and gave her a brief nod. She returned it, then joined the group for warm-ups. She didn't lead, she followed. Every motion was still deliberate, efficient, and stripped of ego. But the rest of the class followed her pace now, as if she had silently reset the rhythm of the dojo. After warm-ups, the instructor stood in front of the group and cleared his throat. "We're honored today to welcome a guest to our class. Some of you already know who she is. For others, it may come as a surprise." He paused and the room stilled completely. Isabel Moreau is a former international martial arts champion. She has trained military units, law enforcement, and competed at the highest levels of competition. She has graciously agreed to assist in today's class. All heads turned toward her. Isabel stood with hands gently folded, expression unreadable. She didn't nod or bow or acknowledge the attention. She waited. The instructor turned to her. "If you're willing, would you demonstrate a few advanced applications for us?" Isabel stepped forward. The students parted without needing to be told. She moved into the center of the mat. The instructor called over a black belt to assist. Oliver stepped forward. There was no smugness now, no pride in his step. His face was serious, respectful, even a little nervous. Isabel looked at him for a moment, then she gave a small nod. The instructor called out the technique. "We'll begin with basic counters to linear strikes. Please observe." Oliver moved in with a textbook jab. In a blur of movement, Isabel stepped inside the strike, deflected the arm, and redirected his balance. She didn't throw him this time. She simply turned his momentum inward and brought him to one knee in a controlled descent. The dojo was silent. The precision was clear. The flow of energy from attack to neutralization had been seamless. They reset. The instructor announced the next movement, a more aggressive series of strikes. Oliver adjusted and attacked again. Isabel's response was more direct this time. She ducked beneath a high hook, closed the distance, and executed a clean sweep that placed Oliver on his back again. She stopped the motion before impact, her hand gently touching his chest. The students around the mat were locked in place, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. It was like watching a dance they had never seen before, one where every move had purpose, every breath intention. The instructor continued calling techniques. Isabel demonstrated each with quiet ease. Her movements were smooth but final. She never moved faster than necessary. She never showed off. Her control was total. After the final demonstration, the instructor clapped his hands once. "Thank you, Isabel, that was incredible." She bowed slightly and returned to her place. The room stayed quiet. Then slowly hands began to clap. Not loud, not chaotic. It started with the younger students and spread upward. Soon the entire class was applauding. Not out of excitement, but out of gratitude and recognition. Isabel remained still. She didn't smile, didn't raise her hands. She simply nodded in thanks and let the sound wash past her. The instructor raised a hand and the room settled. We're lucky to learn from someone who understands not only the technique, but the spirit of this practice. Let's take that into today's sparring. As students began to pair up, a subtle shift had occurred. No one approached her first, not out of avoidance, but out of deference. It was as if no one wanted to presume they were worthy to spar with her. Then Oliver stepped forward. "I'd like another round if that's all right," he said softly. Isabel met his eyes, then nodded once. They moved into the center again. This time, there was no crowding around. The students stayed back, respectful. Even the instructor stepped aside. They bowed. Oliver came forward carefully, guard up, footing solid. He didn't attack wildly. He approached with control, testing, probing. Isabel moved with the same poise, never rushing. He threw a quick combination, low and high. She blocked both, shifted her weight, and countered with a light tap to his side. Point. They reset. Oliver smiled faintly, the first smile he'd worn all class. It wasn't arrogance, it was respect. He moved in again, faster this time. She met him halfway. They exchanged several techniques, her blocks and redirections weaving through his attacks like threads. He tried a sweep. She adjusted, caught his leg, and guided him down again, stopping just before contact. He lay on the mat staring up at the ceiling. "She makes it look like air," someone whispered from the side. Oliver sat up and exhaled. "Thank you," he said to her. Isabel bowed in return. The instructor moved forward again. "Let's rotate." The rest of class passed quietly. Students worked more thoughtfully now, more deliberately. The loudest voices were the quietest now. Every mistake was met with patience, every success with humility. At the end of class, as everyone bowed out, the instructor made a final announcement. "Isabel has offered to stay after class and answer a few questions. If anyone is interested in learning more about her background or her training, you're welcome to stay." Half the class lingered. Some stood awkwardly, unsure what to ask. One teenage girl stepped forward first. "How did you learn all that? I mean, how did you get that good?" Isabel looked at her for a moment, then replied, "I practiced every day, whether I wanted to or not. I listened more than I spoke, and I never tried to be the best, just better than I was yesterday." Another student raised a hand. "Is it true you trained military teams?" "Yes." "What was that like?" "Different from this, but the lessons are the same. You must know your body, know your breath, know your purpose." The room was quiet again, absorbing every word. A younger boy stepped forward. "Why don't you compete anymore?" Isabel paused. "Because I no longer need to." He nodded, unsure, but accepting. The instructor finally stepped beside her. "Thank you, Isabel. You've given us more than we expected." She turned to him. "I came to train. I didn't expect to teach. And yet you did," he said, "whether you intended to or not." She gave him a quiet smile. As the last of the students began to gather their things, the instructor raised his voice slightly. One last thing. We've spoken as a team, and we'd like to offer Isabel a permanent spot here, as an assistant instructor, if she's willing. Murmurs of agreement passed through the group. She looked around the room. The same place where she had once stood, ignored in the back, now watched her with genuine respect. Her gaze lingered on the girl with the question, the boy who had asked about competing Oliver, the instructor. Then she nodded. I'll help where I can. A few clapped, others smiled. One student bowed deeply from across the room. Later, as the room emptied and shoes were slipped on, Isabel stepped out into the hallway. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dojo floor. Her face softened just slightly in the orange glow. The instructor joined her at the door. I hope this place has earned your trust, he said quietly. She looked at him. It has. He nodded, then opened the door for her. As she walked out, a silence settled over the dojo. Not the silence of tension, but of reverence. She had never asked for recognition. She had never raised her voice. Yet the space felt changed, calmer, wiser. One of the newer students picked up her water bottle and turned to the others. I'm going to start training more seriously. I didn't know it could look like that, like something real. Another nodded. Same. I thought I understood what this was. She showed me I don't. And so the story of the quiet woman who walked in alone and unnoticed continued. Not in shouts or medals, but in the silence she left behind. A silence that taught more than words ever could. A silence that reminded them all that strength does not need to be loud to be respected. That mastery needs no applause, only discipline, humility, and time. It had been 2 weeks since Isabel began assisting in the dojo. She still arrived quietly, never late, never seeking attention. She helped students without taking control, corrected form, with gestures more than words, and kept her answers short but clear when asked for guidance. What had once been a place where she was ignored had transformed into a space where her presence carried silent weight. She never took a title. The instructor offered to call her sensei during announcements, but she politely declined. Let them decide what to call me, she had said. And they did. Some called her Miss Isabel. Others just nodded or bowed with extra depth. None ever addressed her casually. The atmosphere in the dojo had changed. The younger students now trained with more intention. The older ones approached drills with quiet curiosity, trying to absorb the subtleties of her movement. She never boasted, never showed frustration, and never held herself above anyone else. That, more than anything, earned their respect. One Thursday evening, a small group stayed late after class. The instructor had ended the session early and offered the space to any who wished to work on specific skills. Isabel remained by the edge of the mat, kneeling and retying her GI top. A girl named Amelia, one of the teens, approached her hesitantly. Miss Isabel, can I ask something? Isabel looked up. Of course. Amelia bit her lip. I get scared when sparring. I know the moves, but when I'm actually in front of someone, my mind blanks. Did that ever happen to you? Isabel tilted her head slightly. Yes. Amelia blinked. Really? Isabel nodded. Fear is part of the body's message. It is not the enemy. But if you listen only to fear, you cannot hear anything else. Amelia sat beside her. What do I do with it then? You train with it, not against it. You welcome it, learn where it lives, and then when it speaks, you answer with action. Amelia nodded slowly. Okay, I'll try. Behind them, a small group of parents watched. One mother leaned over to another and whispered, She's changed this place. I haven't seen the kids this focused in months. She doesn't yell, she doesn't brag, and yet they hang on every word, the other replied. Later that evening, a few adults were going through form repetitions near the far end of the mat. One of them, a green belt named Theodore, looked up from his kata and approached Isabel. I was watching you move earlier. There's something different about how you step. I've read about concepts like internal balance and structure, but you make it look so natural. Would you ever consider teaching a dedicated class on that? Isabel regarded him for a moment. Are you willing to study it seriously? He nodded. Yes, I think we all are. She looked around the dojo at the faces, watching her quietly at the instructor nodding in the corner. She stood and addressed the group. Then meet me here next Wednesday early before regular class. That next Wednesday, a group of 10 showed up early. By the end of the week, it was 20. The dojo had to rearrange its schedule to accommodate the interest. Her class was not fast-paced. It focused on breathing, stance, precision, and body awareness. Some called it meditative. Others said it felt like unlocking something that had always been out of reach. One evening after class, the instructor sat across from Isabel near the front of the room. The lights had been dimmed and only the hum of the heater filled the space. "May I ask you something?" he said. Isabel nodded. "When you first came here, did you plan to stay? Number? What changed?" She looked around the dojo. They listened. He nodded slowly. "You've done more for this place than I could have asked for." "I came to practice," she said softly. "They gave me purpose." Word of her presence spread beyond the dojo. A neighboring martial arts school sent a small group to attend one of her classes. They sat quietly, took notes, and afterward thanked her with bows so deep their foreheads touched the mat. One weekend, the dojo hosted a local exhibition for students and parents. It was meant to be informal, a showcase of skills and growth. The younger students performed simple forms. The older ones demonstrated partner drills. Then came a short sparring round between two senior black belts. The crowd applauded politely after each segment. The instructor stepped forward. "We'd like to finish today's program with a demonstration by one of our own, someone who has reminded us what this art truly means." He looked toward Isabel. She stepped forward calmly, dressed in the same rental J she had worn from the beginning. There was no belt around her waist this time, only the uniform and her name, stitched modestly in black on the chest. Oliver stepped beside her. He had volunteered earlier in the day. They bowed. The room fell silent. Their demonstration began with traditional movements, then transitioned into flowing drills. At no point did they move aggressively, but the speed and control they displayed drew gasps from the audience. Oliver lunged with committed strikes. Isabel evaded and countered with precise control. She used his energy, never wasting motion. At the final exchange, she redirected his final attack into a gentle takedown and placed her open palm over his chest, stopping short of contact. Oliver bowed deeply from the mat, then stood and faced the crowd. "That was not choreographed," he said, "and I have never felt more in control or more outmatched in my life." The crowd stood and applauded. Isabel bowed once, then returned to the side of the mat. After the event, several parents approached her. "My daughter talks about you all the time," one said. "You've made her feel safe here." "My son never stuck with anything until now," said another. "He wants to train like you." Isabel listened. She said little, but her eyes softened at their words. Later, as the crowd left and the mats were being cleaned, a young woman approached with two little girls in tow. "Miss Moreau, I know this is forward, but I teach at a local women's shelter. We've been trying to start a self-defense program. Would you consider teaching a session? Even just one?" Isabel looked down at the two girls holding their mother's hands. They looked up at her with wide eyes. "Yes," she said. The woman blinked. "Really? If they are willing to learn, I will teach." The woman smiled. "Thank you, truly." That weekend, Isabel visited the shelter and led a short, quiet session on awareness, posture, and simple escapes. She didn't dress in a jai. She wore plain clothes and spoke softly, but the effect was immediate. The women left standing taller, more sure of themselves. She taught them not to fight, but to carry themselves like someone who was not easy to move. Back at the dojo, a framed photo was hung on the back wall. It was not a portrait. It was a still image of her demonstrating a technique with Oliver, captured mid-motion. Below, it was a quote printed on a small plaque. "True strength is silent. It does not demand attention. It moves with purpose and speaks only when it must." She never commented on the photo, but she did stand in front of it one evening after class, eyes resting on the image for a long time. As months passed, Isabel's quiet influence reshaped the dojo completely. The loudest students became the most disciplined. Those who once showed off now studied more carefully. Students began bowing deeper, listening longer, asking fewer shallow questions, and more thoughtful ones. One night, a new student arrived. Young, nervous, and wearing a jai too large for her frame. She entered quietly, looked around the room, and hesitated near the door. No one laughed, no one smirked. Isabel noticed and stepped toward her. "First class." The girl nodded. "Yes, I don't know if I'll be any good." Isabel smiled softly. That's not required. Just come in. The girl followed her onto the mat. As warm-ups began, the others moved aside to make room. The girl stood beside Isabel and mirrored her movements. At the end of class, the instructor looked at the group and said, "Sometimes the best lessons come from those who do not ask to teach. We are fortunate to have one with us." As the students bowed, Isabel stood quietly in the front row, hands at her sides. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Outside, the night air was cool. A few students lingered to talk with their families. Isabel stepped out and walked down the path beside the building, her gym bag over her shoulder. One of the parents caught up to her. "Miss Moreau, may I ask one thing?" She stopped and nodded. "What made you walk into the dojo that first day?" Isabel thought for a moment before answering. "I had not trained in years. I missed it. I wanted to see if it still had meaning, and did it." She looked back toward the lights of the dojo now glowing through the windows. "Yes, and more." The parent smiled, thanked her, and walked back to the car. Isabel continued down the street, disappearing into the quiet evening. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Someone who carried their strength with grace and let their actions speak for them? Tell us about them in the comments. We would be honored to hear their story. And if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. We share them with care and always with respect.